"Can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, rusty from hours of talking only to the CB radio. "Miss, I'm going to help you." Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of storm clouds, and in them, Elias saw terror so profound it reached into his chest and squeezed his heart like a fist. She tried to move away from him, but her body refused to obey, managing only a pathetic crawling motion that tore something deep inside his soul. "Easy now," he said softly, gentling his voice the way he used to with his daughter after nightmares. "I won't hurt you. I swear on my wife's grave, I won't hurt you." Those gray eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the threat. Finding neither, she finally stopped struggling, her body going limp with exhaustion and surrender. Elias removed his flannel shirt and wrapped it carefully around her shivering form. When he lifted her into his arms, she weighed almost nothing, like lifting a broken bird, and he could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her ruined dress. Whoever had done this hadn't just beaten her. They had tried to erase her. But Elias Crane had spent 3 years learning that some things refuse to stay buried. Some things fight their way back to the surface, demanding to be saved. As he carried her toward his idling truck, the young woman's lips moved, barely audible above the diesel engine's rumble. They'll come for me." "Let them come," Elias whispered, his jaw tightening with a resolve he hadn't felt since the day they lowered his wife's casket into the ground. "Let them try." He didn't know yet that Sloan Morrison was an accountant who'd stumbled onto a paper trail worth killing for. He didn't know about the senator's dirty money or the tracking chips sewn into her dress. He didn't know that by sunrise, his quiet farmhouse would become a battlefield. All he knew was that sometimes, salvation comes in the form of a broken stranger on a lonely road. And sometimes, saving someone else is the only way to save yourself. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The farmhouse appeared through the darkness like a sanctuary carved from timber and determination. Elias navigated his truck down the gravel driveway, each bump sending fresh waves of pain through the broken woman in his arms. The porch light cast long shadows across weathered siding, and somewhere in the distance, his cattle lowed their evening complaints to an indifferent sky. Sloan drifted in and out of consciousness during the careful transfer from truck to house, her breathing shallow and labored. Elias kicked open the front door and carried her straight to the kitchen table. The same oak surface where he'd once helped his daughter with homework, where he'd shared quiet dinners with his late wife. Now it would serve as an operating table for a stranger whose name he didn't even know. He cleared the table with a sweep of his arm, sending salt shakers and yesterday's mail clattering to the linoleum floor. From the bathroom medicine cabinet, he gathered what supplies he could. Hydrogen peroxide, gauze, medical tape his mother-in-law had left behind after her hip surgery. His hands moved with surprising steadiness as he cleaned the worst of her wounds, muscle memory from his army medic training 20 years past guiding each motion. The cut above her left eye would need stitches. Her shoulder sat at an unnatural angle, dislocated, probably when they'd thrown her from whatever vehicle had brought her to that roadside grave. Elias had reset dislocated joints on horses. The principle couldn't be that different. He counted to 3 under his breath, then pulled with quick, practiced pressure. The pop of bone sliding back into socket was audible in the quiet kitchen, and Sloan's eyes flew open with a gasp of pain that cut through him like a blade. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice gentler than it had been in 3 years. "You're safe. I'm just trying to help." Her storm-gray eyes fixed on his face, wild with confusion and terror. She tried to speak, but only managed a croak that might have been a question or a plea. Elias reached for a glass of water, supporting her head as she took careful sips. "Rest now," he said. "We'll talk when you're stronger." He carried her to the guest bedroom, a room that had remained untouched since his wife's sister visited 2 Christmases ago, and covered her with quilts that smelled of lavender and better days. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows like fingers testing for weakness. Elias spent the night in the kitchen chair beside her door, his hunting rifle across his knees. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every creak of settling timber, every whisper of wind through the eaves. Something in the woman's terror had awakened an old instinct in him, the same hypervigilance that had kept him alive during 2 tours in Afghanistan. Predators left tracks, and whatever had done this to her might still be hunting. Dawn came gray and cold, painting the farmhouse windows with weak light that did nothing to warm the chill in Elias's bones. He was making coffee when the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Through the kitchen window, he watched a sheriff's cruiser roll to a stop beside his truck. Deputy Marcus Webb emerged from the vehicle with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who'd worn a badge for too many years in too small a town. Elias had known Webb since high school, had even dated his sister briefly before shipping out to basic training. The deputy's gut strained against his uniform shirt now, and his hairline had retreated to somewhere north of his crown, but his eyes still held the same calculating intelligence that had made him a decent linebacker and a better poker player. Elias stepped onto the porch, closing the front door behind him with more force than necessary. "Morning, Marcus. Little early for social calls, isn't it?" Webb's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Eli. Got a call about some road debris on Highway 40 yesterday evening. Trucker reported seeing something that looked like it might have been someone. You didn't happen to see anything unusual on your way home, did you?" The question hung in the morning air like smoke from a distant fire. Elias kept his expression neutral, his hands loose at his sides. "Can't say I did. Was probably just roadkill. Deer get pretty bold this time of year." "Probably." Webb's gaze drifted past Elias to the windows of the house, lingering a moment too long on the guest bedroom. "Mind if I take a look around? Just to be thorough." "I do mind, actually." Elias stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Webb and the front door. "Unless you've got a warrant, I'd prefer you stick to the public areas of my property." Something shifted in Webb's expression, a hardening around the eyes that spoke of decisions already made and loyalties already sold. "No warrant needed, Eli. Just being neighborly. Then you won't mind being neighborly from the road." They stared at each other for a long moment, 2 men who'd once shared beers and hunting stories, now separated by something darker than mere years. Finally, Webb nodded and touched the brim of his hat. "You take care now, Eli. This county can be a dangerous place for folks who don't mind their own business." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Elias watched the cruiser disappear down his driveway, then stood on the porch for another 10 minutes, scanning the tree line for movement that didn't belong. When he finally went back inside, he found Sloan awake and sitting up in bed, her face pale but alert. "Was that the police?" Her voice was stronger now, though still rough from whatever damage had been done to her throat. Elias sat heavily in the bedside chair. "Deputy Sheriff. Old friend, supposedly. He was asking about road debris." The color drained from Sloan's already pale face. "They're looking for me. They know someone found me." "Who's they?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Elias saw something that might have been resignation or might have been resolve. "I need to show you something first, but I need to know I can trust you." Without a word, Elias rolled up the sleeve of his Henley, exposing the puckered scar that ran from his wrist to his elbow. A souvenir from an IED outside Kandahar that had taken 2 of his squad mates and left him with a medical discharge and a chest full of guilt. Then he unbuttoned his shirt enough to reveal the star-shaped scar below his collarbone, where shrapnel had missed his heart by less than an inch. "Army medic, 10th Mountain Division," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to be hurt by people who don't see you as human. I know what it's like to need someone to believe you when the whole world seems stacked against you." Sloan studied his scars with the attention of someone who understood that wounds told stories words couldn't capture. Finally, she nodded. "My name is Sloan Morrison. I'm an accountant, was an accountant for Morrison and Associates in Baltimore. 3 weeks ago, I was reviewing transport contracts for a client, routine stuff, when I noticed discrepancies in the shipping manifests. Trucks carrying loads that didn't match their paperwork, routes that made no financial sense, payments to shell companies that didn't exist." She paused, her fingers working nervously at the edge of the quilt. "I should have minded my own business, should have filed my report and moved on. But the numbers, they were huge, Elias. Millions of dollars moving through fake contracts, and all of it tied to legitimate businesses, government contracts, even political campaigns. You found something they didn't want found. I found evidence of the biggest money laundering operation on the East Coast. Trucking companies, construction firms, even some of the state highway contracts, all of it connected by one man. Senator William Blackwood." The name hit Elias like a physical blow. He'd voted for Blackwood in the last election, had seen his face on billboards promising infrastructure jobs and economic growth for working families. "I made copies," Sloan continued, "put everything on a secure drive and tried to take it to the FBI. That's when they grabbed me. 3 men in expensive suits who knew my name, knew where I lived, knew about my sister in Portland and my parents in Florida. They made it clear what would happen to all of us if I didn't hand over the evidence. But you didn't give it to them." A ghost of a smile crossed her battered features. "I'm stubborn. My mother always said it would get me in trouble someday. They worked me over pretty good trying to make me talk. When I wouldn't break, they decided to make me disappear instead. Drove me out to the middle of nowhere and left me to die." Elias felt something cold and familiar settling in his chest. The same ice-water calm that had carried him through firefights and roadside bombs. "Where's the drive now?" "Hidden. There's a rest stop about 5 miles from where you found me. Mile marker 47, near the old stone bridge. I buried it under the 3rd picnic table from the parking lot before they took me. We need to get it." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "You don't understand what these people are capable of. They have money, connections, people in law enforcement. That deputy who was here, how do you know he wasn't already bought?" Before Elias could answer, a new sound cut through the morning quiet. The slow crunch of gravel under tires, approaching from the direction of the main road. But this wasn't the official rumble of a police cruiser. This was something sleeker, quieter, the purr of expensive engines that didn't belong on a working farm. Elias moved to the window and peered through the curtains. 3 black SUVs were winding up his driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the weak sunlight like empty eyes. As he watched, they spread out in a loose semicircle around his house, blocking any possible escape route. "Sloan," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off the vehicles. "How well can you move?" "Well enough if my life depends on it." "It does." He turned from the window, his face set in hard lines that would have been familiar to anyone who'd served with him in the mountains of Afghanistan. "Get dressed. We're leaving. Now." Outside, car doors began opening with soft, efficient clicks. Men emerged, 4 of them that Elias could count, all wearing dark suits and the kind of purposeful expressions that meant business was about to be conducted. The kind of business that left people in shallow graves along forgotten highways. But as Elias helped Sloan to her feet and began planning their escape, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Spray painted on his front gate in bold red letters was a simple message. "We know you have her." The hunters had found their trail. Elias moved with the efficiency of a man who'd learned that hesitation meant death. He grabbed his go-bag from the bedroom closet, old habits from his army days, and helped Sloan into clothes from his late wife's dresser. The jeans hung loose on her frame, but they would have to do. "Back door," he whispered, leading her through the kitchen. "We'll take the ATV to the woods. Circle back for the truck once they commit to searching the house." But as they reached the rear exit, Elias caught a glimpse of movement through the kitchen window. A fifth man positioned to cover their retreat. These weren't amateurs sent to clean up a loose end. These were professionals who understood angles and kill zones. Change of plans. He guided Sloan toward the basement stairs. "There's a root cellar that connects to the old storm drain. Built it myself after the divorce, when I thought the world might end and I wanted to be ready." The basement was cool and dark, filled with the smell of earth and old wood. Elias felt along the far wall until his fingers found the hidden panel he'd installed 3 years ago during the long, sleepless nights after Sarah's funeral. The passage beyond was narrow but functional, a tunnel that emerged near the treeline, 200 yards from the house. They crawled through darkness and mud, Sloan's labored breathing the only sound besides the distant rumble of engines. When they finally emerged into the gray morning light, Elias could see the black SUVs arranged around his home like pieces on a chessboard. Men with weapons moved with practiced precision, clearing his porch and preparing to breach the front door. "We need that drive," Elias said quietly. "Without it, they'll never stop hunting you." Sloan nodded, her jaw set despite the pain that flickered across her features with every movement. "The rest stop, but they'll be watching the roads." "Not all of them." Elias led her deeper into the woods, toward a hunting cabin he'd inherited from his grandfather. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas beneath loose floorboards, were items he'd hoped never to use again. Tactical radios, night vision equipment, and enough firepower to outfit a small squad. It took them 4 hours to reach the rest stop, moving cross-country through terrain that Elias knew like a prayer. The old stone bridge cast long shadows in the afternoon light, and the picnic area appeared deserted except for a lone semi-truck whose driver was catching sleep in his cab. The drive was exactly where Sloan had buried it, wrapped in plastic and sealed with electrical tape. No bigger than a pack of cigarettes, but containing enough evidence to topple a senator and expose a criminal network that stretched from Baltimore to Richmond. "Now what?" Sloan asked, clutching the drive like a lifeline. Elias studied the device, then looked back toward the direction of his farm. Smoke was rising from the treeline. They'd probably burned his house after finding it empty. 3 generations of his family's history, reduced to ash because he'd chosen to be a good Samaritan. "I've got a contact in Baltimore. Military intelligence works cyber crimes now. If anyone can get this to the right people, it's him." The drive to Baltimore took 2 hours through back roads and forgotten highways. Elias's contact, a grizzled master sergeant named Rodriguez, worked out of a coffee shop in Fells Point that doubled as a front for off-the-books operations. But when they arrived, Rodriguez took one look at the drive and shook his head. "Can't help you, brother. Word came down this morning. Anyone connected to the Morrison case is persona non grata. Orders from the top." "The top of what?" Rodriguez's eyes were sympathetic but unyielding. "High enough that I value my pension more than our friendship. Whatever you've stumbled into, it goes deeper than you think. Every law enforcement agency from here to D.C. has been told to consider this a matter of national security." They left the coffee shop empty-handed, with Sloan's evidence still burning a hole in Elias's pocket and nowhere safe to run. The senator's reach extended farther than either of them had imagined. Into federal agencies, military intelligence, maybe even the Bureau itself. "We're on our own," Elias said as they drove back toward the county line. "But that doesn't mean we're out of options." He made a stop at a hardware store in Annapolis, purchasing items that seemed innocent individually but deadly in combination. Fertilizer, diesel fuel, copper pipe, electronic timers. If they were going to make a stand, it would be on ground of his choosing. They spent the evening preparing his farm for war. Elias had learned defensive tactics in the mountains of Afghanistan, where every compound might become a fortress and every farmer might be called upon to defend his land. He showed Sloan how to rig motion sensors to floodlights, how to create choke points that would funnel attackers into predetermined kill zones. As darkness fell, they shared what might be their last meal together. Canned soup heated over a camping stove, eaten by the light of battery-powered lanterns. The house was gone, but the barn still stood, and its thick walls provided better defensive positions anyway. "Tell me about your wife," Sloan said quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Elias was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 years' worth of unshed grief. Sarah was a teacher, 3rd grade. She believed in people the way others believe in gravity, completely without question. Used to say that everyone deserved a chance to be better than their worst day. He smiled, but it was edged with pain. She would have liked you, would have said you were brave for trying to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything. What happened to her? Cancer. Fought it for 2 years before it finally won. I was on the road when she passed, delivering a load to Phoenix. Got the call from hospice at a truck stop outside Flagstaff. By the time I made it home, she was already gone. Sloan reached across the small table and covered his scarred hand with her own. "I'm sorry. Been angry about it for a long time. Angry at the cancer, angry at God, angry at myself for not being there when she needed me most. But sitting here tonight knowing what's coming, I think maybe she sent me to find you. Maybe this is what she meant about everyone deserving a chance." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began pattering against the barn's metal roof. Through the windows, they could see headlights approaching down the long gravel drive. Not the single beam of a lost traveler, but the coordinated advance of multiple vehicles moving without haste. "They're here," Sloan whispered. Elias checked his rifle one final time, then handed her a pistol and extra magazines. "Remember what I taught you. Center mass, squeeze don't pull, and keep moving. They can't kill what they can't hit." The storm arrived with the violence of divine wrath, turning the night into a chaos of wind and rain and lightning that strobed across the landscape like artillery flashes. The attackers used the thunder as cover, advancing through the darkness with military precision. Elias had spent hours rigging his defenses, and now they paid dividends. Motion sensors triggered floodlights that turned the barnyard into a killing field of harsh white light and deep black shadows. The first man through the gap in his fence line stepped on a pressure plate that sent him flying backward in a cloud of dirt and flame. But there were more behind him. Always more. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Elias moved through the barn like a ghost, using concealed positions he'd prepared earlier to pick off attackers as they tried to breach his perimeter. His military training came back like muscle memory: breathe, aim, fire, move. Never stay in one position long enough to become a target. Sloan proved herself more capable than either of them had expected. When 2 men tried to flank through the old chicken coop, she was waiting with steady hands and deadly aim. The 3rd-grade teacher's daughter had learned to shoot, and the accountant who'd stumbled onto corruption had learned to fight. But even the best defensive position could be overrun by superior numbers and unlimited ammunition. Elias was down to his last magazine when the barn's main door exploded inward, revealing a figure in tactical gear who moved with the fluid grace of a professional killer. The man was tall and lean, with pale eyes that reflected the muzzle flashes like chips of ice. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never failed to complete a contract, never left a job unfinished. "Elias Crane," the man said, his voice carrying easily over the storm. "Former Staff Sergeant, 10th Mountain Division. 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge, Purple Heart. Impressive resume. But you're outgunned and outnumbered. Send out the woman, and this ends quietly." "Counteroffer," Elias called back, taking cover behind a steel support beam. "Go to hell." The hitman's smile was visible even in the uncertain light. "I was hoping you'd say that." They circled each other through the maze of farm equipment and hay bales, 2 predators seeking advantage in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The hitman was younger, faster, better equipped. But Elias fought on his home ground, with the desperate strength of a man protecting something precious. The end came suddenly. Elias's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment, and the hitman closed the distance with inhuman speed. They went down hard, rolling across the barn floor in a tangle of limbs and violence. The younger man's training showed precise strikes designed to disable and disorient. But Elias had learned to fight in places where losing meant dying, and dying meant leaving his brothers behind. He absorbed punishment that would have dropped a lesser man, kept moving when his body screamed for him to quit. Still, the hitman's knife found its mark, sliding between ribs with surgical precision. Elias felt his strength bleeding away onto the barn floor, felt his vision starting to tunnel. The hitman rose above him, knife raised for the killing stroke. That's when Sloan stepped out of the shadows behind him, holding the shotgun Elias had given her for backup. Her hands were steady, her voice even steadier. "For every woman you've hurt," she said quietly. "For every life you've destroyed." The blast echoed through the barn like the voice of God's own justice. In the aftermath, as sirens finally approached and the storm began to fade, Sloan used the dead hitman's satellite phone to upload the contents of her drive to every news outlet, law enforcement agency, and government watchdog organization she could find. The senator's carefully constructed web of corruption began unraveling before dawn, taking down judges, deputies, federal agents, and politicians across 3 states. 3 days later, Elias stood on the platform at the Greyhound station in Baltimore, his arm in a sling and his ribs wrapped tight enough to breathe. Sloan wore clothes donated by the Victims Assistance Program and carried a small bag containing everything she owned in the world. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Seattle, maybe. Or Portland. Somewhere they've never heard of Senator Blackwood or highway syndicates or any of this." She studied his face, memorizing details. "What about you?" "Home. Going to rebuild what they burned down. Maybe add a guest room this time." He managed a smile that held more hope than he'd felt in years. "Someone told me once that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst day." The bus arrived with a diesel rumble that reminded him of his own truck, currently impounded as evidence but scheduled for return once the trials ended. Sloan climbed the steps, then turned back for one final look. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me as worth saving." "Thank you," Elias replied, "for reminding me what that feels like." He watched the bus disappear into traffic, carrying Sloan toward whatever new life waited beyond the horizon. Then he walked back to his borrowed pickup and began the drive home to his land, his cattle, and his future. A future he could finally imagine again. The newspapers would call him a hero. The television reporters would want interviews. But Elias Crane knew the truth. Sometimes salvation was as simple as stopping when everyone else drove by. Sometimes being a good Samaritan was enough to save 2 lives instead of 1. The Maryland countryside rolled past his windows, autumn gold and full of promise. He was no longer a ghost haunting his own life. He was a man driving toward tomorrow.